my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great.
Hello, Beyond Your Wildest Dreams tribe. I'm Dr. Noah DeCoyer, your co-host, and on behalf of my partners, Dr. Michael Akinfora and Dr. Wanda Lee McPhee, we want to thank you all for subscribing. As we surge to 100,000 subscribers, we would like to show you our appreciation with 3 free gifts. In our show notes on iTunes and Podomatic, there are 3 separate links to each of our most latest ebooks: Fermentation 101, Paleo Crockpot Style, and Whole Foods Harvest. Thank you again, and before you begin listening to this incredible podcast, don't forget to register for our upcoming summit, the Longevity and Anti-Aging Project, Living Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, at www.antiagingproject.com.
So welcome everyone to Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. This week's guest is Dr. Amir Rashadian. He is joining us from Frederick, Maryland, United States. He has a Bachelor of Science in both chemistry and human biology, as well as a doctorate in chiropractic. He is a speaker, consultant, and nationally published author, as well as being a chiropractor. He has over 15 years of clinical experience, and his practice has helped thousands of people every year. He regularly speaks at corporations, conventions, and churches, and has a passion for guiding people on a path to recovery and wellness. We're going to talk about his book today, The StressProof Life, The Secret to Health, Wealth, and Happiness. Welcome to our podcast, Dr. Amir.
Well, hello to you, Wanda Lee, and hello to the wonderful audience of listeners you have. I regularly run into people who tell me they subscribe to your program and they love it, and they're such wonderful people, and obviously I'm a big fan of yours myself, so I'm very honored that I'm with you today.
Well, thank you so much. One of the things we like to give our listeners is a little chance to get to know you better to start with. So let's talk about your story, where you've come from, how you wrote the book, and why you became a chiropractor.
You got it. When I was 9 years old is when I decided I had to become a doctor, and the reason for that was my dad and I were traveling through the remote villages of Iran in the mountains, and in this one village, a woman went into labor. She was in tremendous pain, obviously having complications. People were standing around. No one knew how to help her. A midwife walked over. She knelt down and examined her for maybe a minute or two, stood up and said, "I am so sorry. There's no heartbeat. There's nothing I can do." And she left and left that young woman alone in her husband's arms. And that was it. And I'm looking in the eyes of this young woman who was just told she's not going to live another few hours, and her husband just collapsed. He just started crying. How could this be? We were just about to start a family, and I felt so helpless. If you've seen 9-year-olds cry, my throat was all choked up, my chest felt tight. I'm having trouble just catching my breath, and tears are just flowing down my eyes. And my dad saw me, and he picked me up, he held me, he carried me out of there. And when I calmed down, the two of us climbed down the mountain to get in our car and drive home. On the way home, "Dad, I don't want to feel like that ever again. I don't want to feel so helpless." And he asked, "What are you going to do about it?" I said, "I'm going to go be a surgeon. I'm going to be the best surgeon in the whole world. I'm going to carry my medical bag with me everywhere I go, and I'm just going to save lives." And that's where it started. 10 years later, I was a student at George Washington University, and I had the grades and the list of extracurricular activities you have to get into a good medical school. And I was applying to the early selection program, wanting to start early. I was on track. I went home for Christmas break. Our house was now in Maryland, in the U.S., and I walked in the door, and my dad had this big, giant white neck brace on, and he was on some heavy painkillers. You could tell looking in his eyes. He couldn't lift his arms to give me a hug, and that started a journey of going from doctor to doctor, trying to figure out what is wrong with my dad. Dad can't dress himself. He can't feed himself. He can't even sleep. He has to sit in a chair because laying down is too much pressure on his neck. So just imagine every night he's sitting in a chair all night by himself in the dark, waiting for someone to wake up and talk to him. And Dad had this passion of writing. He had a pen and pad with him everywhere. He loved to write, and that was his hobby. Just like someone might want to paint or draw or play a musical instrument, but he couldn't hold a pen in his hand. His hands were completely numb and limp. And so we ended up in a neurosurgeon's office. This neurosurgeon said, "You've got massive problems. It's been going on forever. What have you been waiting for? We need to operate, and we need to operate quickly." He said, "You've got a chance. You'll die under the knife." And I'm terrified. Dad was 70 years old at the time, and I want to tell your audience, there's such a thing as a young 70 and an old 70. So it's not the number, obviously. Plenty of people are 70, they're younger than I am, and vice versa. So, we were terrified because this doctor said, we're going to break and remove the bones in the back of your neck. We'll put rods and screws into your spine. We'll fuse your whole neck. You'll never turn your head again. You may not regain function of your hands. And we're hoping you have less pain. And there's a chance you won't survive. And we talked to 2 other neurosurgeons. They all agreed. We got in a taxi to go home after that 3rd neurosurgeon. And I look over at Dad, and I was carrying all the MRIs and X-rays. And I look over at Dad. He's got his neck brace on. He's cringing because every bump that taxi hits is sending this bolt of pain through his body. And I can tell he wishes he was dead. So I get all choked up all over again, like I did in that village where I watched that woman just die in her husband's arms. And I'm watching my dad right in front of me, and I'm getting all choked up, teary-eyed. This taxi driver saw the 2 of us in his rearview mirror, and he said, "I know you asked me to take you home, but I can tell you're in a lot of pain. There's a chiropractor right down the street. Why don't you let me take you there instead?" Well, the rest of it is history. We ended up at this chiropractor's office, and the chiropractor took us in and talked to us and read those X-rays and MRIs and CTs I was carrying in the back of that taxi, and said, "Hey, I can help you, and this is how we'll do it." And he did. 6 months later, my dad was able to hold a pen and write again. He was able to take care of himself. My dad lived another 18 years. He lived to be 88 years old. And I'm telling you, at 88, Dad was younger than when he was 70. At 88, he'd get up and take care of himself. He'd exercise, go visit his friends. All of them were in nursing homes, but not my dad. He was traveling. He was enjoying his life. Dad lived long enough to be my best man at my wedding. He stood right next to me. He lived long enough to meet and hold my first son when he was born. And those 18 years are invaluable. So naturally, I looked at that, and I wanted to do what that chiropractor did for my dad, is be a chiropractor, remove interference from the nerve system, and allow that human potential to be expressed the way it did in my dad and in my whole family now today. That's why I'm a chiropractor.
Well, that's a pretty powerful motivation and a massive purpose to help people. And everyone, I am sure, in your community and now around the world is going to benefit from that. You went from, which you still do, your practice home in Maryland, but you also have written the StressProof Life. So let's talk a little bit about stress. What do you believe is the reason people want to avoid stress? Why is that a bad idea if they try to avoid stress?
Absolutely. I'll tell you another quick story just to get the whole idea of stress started. I grew up in Iran, obviously, and in 1981 the air raids started, and I remember that one night my mother said, "Hey, you have to turn on your radio before you go to sleep tonight." And I turned on my radio, turned up the volume. There was no programming; it was silent. And I went to sleep. But a little after midnight, this loud siren blared through the radio, and I just flew out of bed, and with my family we all went out the door, and we were in this tall luxury apartment building, and we went down the hallway, ran down the stairs all the way to the basement. Everybody else from the building were waiting there, and it was cold and dark, and everybody was terrified. Then we heard the roar of this jet engine fly overhead, and the next thing we heard was the whistle of this bomb that had just been dropped. And this whistle was getting louder and louder as this bomb is just getting closer and closer, but you can't tell where it is. The whistle is way too high pitched. So all you can do is wait and hope and pray that that bomb is not right directly over your head. So a few seconds later, big giant explosion. Our building shook and the lights flickered. but the bomb hadn't hit us, and we were relieved. And so you look at that type of stress, and obviously, hopefully, I expect none of our listeners here have been through something like that, but I also expect everyone would agree stress like that over a long period of time would most definitely lead to illness and disease, and it could take a toll on the body. So I believe that's why people are always trying to avoid stress. Stress itself, the word was coined by Dr. Hans Selye. He did experiments on lab rats. He found that they all, when they're under stress, they got the same diseases you and I do, is heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, arthritis, obesity. They all got sick. So the conclusion obviously would be that stress is bad. But if you look deeper, there are researches that actually show that stress is necessary. Like there was a research on a single cell organism called amoeba, and they took away all their stress in these petri dishes. And these cells all died early when there was no stress. So their conclusion is that life requires stress, and stress sustains life. So the question is stress good or bad? And like you, I've done a lot of speaking, public speaking, and I've talked to audiences all around, and I always want to ask them, what do you think stress? Is it good or bad? And invariably, the majority of people say stress is bad. Some people say it's good. And the rest of the people say it's both, good and bad. And for me, that question is like asking if gravity is good or bad, or asking if money is good or bad, or fire. I mean, you use fire to cook your food, but it can burn your hands. So does that mean it's good or is it bad? It's really neither. So stress, gravity can make you fall down, or it can keep your feet on the ground when you're walking. It's neither good or bad. Money is the same thing. If you look at how money is spent by a terrorist organization to do evil, you would say money is bad, but then you look at all the philanthropy and good things that come out of people who use money for as a force of good. Money is neither is stress. And so we really can't avoid that stress. One of my favorite stories, if I may, about stress is Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. He wrote the book Power of Positive Thinking, and he talked about how he was counseling one of his clients, and the client said, stress is the cause of all of my problems, and if I didn't have any stress, I'd be happy. And Dr. Peale said, would you like to meet some people who don't have any stress? Obviously the answer is yes. He said, follow me. He said, where are these people? What do they do? What do they eat? What do they say? And he said, just follow me. So he walked him all the way out onto a cemetery. He said, everybody underground here has no stress. And so really, to avoid stress, if the goal is to reduce stress, it's similar to taking a step closer to that grave. That's not what we want to do. We want to excel. We want to grow. We want to succeed. And that's my opinion about why we shouldn't really avoid stress.
Well, let's give our listeners an idea about how the body deals with stress. So you give some examples in your book about the body's stress response. Let's explain that for people a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about the bombing, and bombs fall in all our lives. A bomb could be a disease or a tragedy or a loss. It could be a bankruptcy or a divorce, or just hearing bad news or a big loud sound all of a sudden. All of a sudden we're in the middle of an earthquake maybe. Your pupils will dilate. Your face will turn pale white. Blood will leave your face. The blood will leave your hands and feet. Blood will rush to your big muscles so you can do what's called fight or flight, run away or fight to defend yourself. In that moment, your digestion will cease. Your bladder will stop working. Your immune system will stop working. You're not worried about those things at this point. Just imagine if you're being chased by a pack of hungry wolves. You're not going to worry about whether you're digesting your food properly, and your body is the same way. And so those are all good things because they sustain life. They help you survive. The cortisol that gets released also increases your blood sugar and so on. What the problem is that when you're not equipped to handle that type of stress, sustained long term, that's when it becomes a problem. In the book, I talk about the story of a school teacher. Her name is Lauren. Came And she said, all I have is really neck pain. But if you ask a few more questions, she also had high blood pressure and high cholesterol, which she was on medication for. She had indigestion, where she was given a over-the-counter antacid because of the acid reflux. She had constipation, and they'd given her an over-the-counter stool softener. She had insomnia. She was prescribed a low-dose sedative to be able to fall asleep, and she always had this frequent head colds and sinus infections. And she couldn't get rid of that persistent belly fat. She just couldn't lose the weight. And you might think those are all separate things, and she's only here for neck pain. The truth is, her job was super stressful. The type of school she was teaching in, the students she was dealing with, the subject, the parents, the administration, there was a lot of pressure on her. And so obviously, just like being chased by a pack of hungry wolves or being dropped in a snake pit, your blood pressure will go up, but it should come back down when you're safe. Well, she was never in that safe environment, and her nervous system was telling her blood pressure to be high, was telling her heart to pound harder to get more blood out. And why are her hands cold and her feet cold? And you've probably met people like that who constantly, in the summer, my hands are always cold, my feet are always cold. Well, it's because they're probably in that fight or flight, and they're stressed, and naturally cholesterol goes up because it's the building block for a lot of your hormones. And she's having all these colds and flus and sinus infections because her immune system doesn't work well and her digestive system doesn't work well. So anyways, it was a happy ending, and I don't want to get too far into that, but we were able to help her out, and not just with neck pain, but because we changed her ability to withstand the stress. Because what's the alternative? You think about this. Is it that she was under too much stress, or is it that she couldn't handle that stress properly? If she was under just too much stress, well, I'd say quit your job, go on welfare, and live like that. But that doesn't sound like a solution. So we worked the process to strengthen her, to stress-proof her life, so that stress wasn't causing that sickness.
Perfect. For people who think that stress might be genetic, my mom had a lot of stress, or she didn't handle stress well, and so I can't handle stress well. How do you handle clients or patients who come to you and have that kind of thinking?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, just look at identical twins who have identical genes. Their genetic makeup is exactly the same. The twins could be under a lot of stress, and one of them will develop heartburn, and the other one will get tension headaches, or one of them will end up having high blood pressure, and another one will end up just having tension in their neck and having pain. We're all pre-programmed by our genetics, but those programs need to be turned on. They need to run. Here's an example. All of our listeners here, I am sure there's a genetic program inside of them that tells them to sneeze, to cough, to vomit, to spike fevers. You get the idea. So, but none of us are walking around all day and all night sneezing, coughing, and vomiting all over ourselves. Something causes that genetic program to turn on and be activated. And we inhale some black pepper, we'll sneeze. An irritant goes into our lungs, we'll cough. Well, that's a genetic program. We're not doing that. Same thing with, you think about cancer. How many people are struck with cancer, and I know there's a genetic component to that, and I'm not discrediting the genetic predisposition to such a thing. But why is it also that there are some people who've had cancer in their family history who never get cancer, and there are people who don't have any family history of cancer and do get the cancer? It's because of what we're exposed to and what genetic programs we allow to run. If we clean out the environment and our surrounding inside and outside of our bodies, the probability of that drops, and our ability to handle stress increases. I always talk about make an environment conducive to health and healing. And here's an example we talk about in the book is if you go to the National Cancer Institute website and read about how they do the research, they talk about how they use the mice. Mice, they inbreed them, so they all have the same genes, and then they give them cancer, and then they study their genetic response. But how do they give them cancer? Well, the website itself says they inject them with cancer cells, or they radiate them, or just that inbreeding process. And it makes you wonder, well, if we didn't give them these toxins and radiate their bodies and inject cancer into their bodies, would they still get that cancer? Is it really the genes that's causing that cancer? So genetics are important, but we can change the expression of our genes. And you know, you're a bigger expert, Wandalee, than I am about this with your research and all that you've done through your podcast. So definitely, let's not say that we're trapped by our genes. We can change how they're expressed.
Absolutely. That's certainly one of our most important messages that we hope gets across is that people have genes, but how those genes function is definitely up to them. And although stress can certainly be a challenge, how well you cope with that stress is the bigger piece. And I think that's where your book has been so successful in the stress proofing concept and helping people understand that. As a chiropractor, obviously, we see a lot of people and help them with that. So maybe you could help our listeners hear a little bit more about what chiropractic has to do with stress.
Absolutely, it's dependent on the nervous system. So your nerves are what bring information to your brain, and when your brain processes that information, it'll use the nerves to send that information out, instructions to your body, your organs, your glands, your blood vessels, your muscles, your joints. They all receive that information, and so when there's something that interferes in that process, and a common interference is problems in the spine. Through chiropractic adjustments, we can remove those interferences, and if the environment is correct and there's no interference, you handle your stress a whole lot better. So the adjustment, the chiropractic adjustment, has to be a part of your lifestyle, a regular routine part of lifestyle, not just cleaning the environment, but enabling your body to process that environment properly through chiropractic.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite parts of your book is the section about the Simple Seven. Because one thing we know, obviously, as doctors is that we can help, but we're not with people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's so many things that they can do to help themselves. So let's talk a little bit about your Simple Seven.
You got it. Obviously, we probably don't have time to hit all of them, but we talk about exposure to sunlight and when does that become toxic, when is it actually healthy for you, and why is it that some of the research is showing that synthetic sunscreens cause more skin cancer than the sunlight itself. Another one is exercise, and we go through some certain solutions for that. My focus was, let's not give people too many things or something that requires too much of their time, because I always say if brushing your teeth took an hour every day, I doubt everybody would brush their teeth. But the reason you could do it is because you can fit it into your routine. It takes just a couple of minutes, and you can make it a habit that just happens automatically. Well, that's what my focus was with these things. So one thing I talk about is visualizing, and visualizing yourself on vacation. What the brain can conceive or imagine in vivid detail, the body can't tell the difference. And so you look at athletes who visualize their events before they do it. They're the ones that are most successful. I was reading about Michael Phelps, who has a visualization routine that is so detailed. He actually feels the water drops on his face as he comes out of the water at the end of a race. He's visualizing it in that much detail. And you look at the eight gold medals that he won in the Olympics, incredible. So we have examples such as that about visualizing. Music has such healing power, and a typical song is 3 minutes long. I'll tell you a real brief story. I had an aunt named Aunt Simi who was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer, and she came over to the house, and we were thinking she was going to be really depressed, and she's only got 6 weeks to live. What should we do? Well, she walked over to the stereo, and this is way back, decades ago, where the stereos were these big giant things with big giant speakers on the sides, and there was a bin on the bottom where all the cassettes were, and she put the cassette in the player, pushed the big play button, and the speakers came to life, and the music played, and she started to dance. And she grabbed my mom and my dad, and they started dancing in the living room, and they grabbed me and pulled me in the middle, and we're all dancing. And she said, I'm only going to live 6 weeks. I'm going to dance to this song once a day, every day, as long as I'm alive. And she did that. There were times where she was so tired, so weak, the chemotherapy, the radiation, people had to help her up to stand, but she did it. Every day she danced to that song, and she still died of cancer eventually, but not for another 10 years. She actually got stronger, her hair grew back, her body recovered, she looked fine, she actually lived a good, productive, enjoyable life. Music is amazing. What if we all did that? We danced to music for 3 minutes once a day. Breathing is another one where we can teach our body to breathe in a way that's conducive to healing. Now, I go through several exercises in the book, but just think about this as an example. When something bad is about to happen, we naturally do what? Exhale or inhale?
Inhale.
Yeah, we inhale. I mean, suddenly you run into a bear in the woods. You go, and you're scared. And on the other, so that's the stress response. But on the other hand, exhale is you breathe a sigh of relief. That was me when I found out that bomb didn't land on us and it was somewhere else. You breathe a sigh of relief. So the more we slowly exhale, the better we are at dealing stress. And we talk about how to train your body to do that. And obviously, sleep is another one of the simple 7. There's so many parameters that make a big difference. One I'll give you is sleeping in the pitch black darkness. Cover your alarm clock, because just like when your skin is exposed to sunlight, you produce vitamin D. If your skin's in pitch black darkness, you produce melatonin. Melatonin is required for your serotonin levels and dopamine levels, which are your feel-good hormones. And if you're sleeping with a nightlight on, you're not going to get that. And you'll wake up not rested. So again, we go through a few more of those, but that's my simple 7.
That's a wonderful starting point for so many people. Even if they pick one a week to implement and move their health and their stress capacity forward, I think that is so powerful. Simple, effective, proven ways to help people just live better.
Absolutely.
So when we look at the title of your book, it's called The StressProof Life, The Secret to Health, Wealth, and Happiness. Obviously, we've spent the last several minutes talking about health, but where is the wealth and happiness piece of this rolling in?
I've been studying the human body for probably 20 years now, and just studying that stress response and watching what causes stress and how people deal with it and how equipped they are. And I found out the number one reason people fail to reach their goals, their dreams, whether it's a health goal or a wealth goal or a business goal of some sort or a career objective, the number one reason they fail to reach it is because their bodies aren't equipped to handle the stress that comes with that. Anything worth doing has stress. If you're pursuing higher education, Wandali, you have multiple degrees. You have an impressive resume. Was your educational experience completely stress-free?
Absolutely not.
Yet you were able to handle that and get through that and earn what you earned and get to the level you're at. The same with starting a family. There's stress with that. The same with starting a new business or chasing any kind of a dream. If we don't know how to handle stress, then we can't do those things. Or if we want to reduce stress, then we might as well not do any of those things. Everything worth doing has stress, and the body needs to be able and capable of handling that. So if I'm speaking, and whether I'm speaking to a group of high school students or at a church, or it doesn't matter if it's a convention of CEOs, this is the message that how healthy you are depends on how much stress you can handle. But how successful you are also depends on how much stress you can handle. The size of your chiropractic practice is dependent on how much stress you can handle. The number of employees you have in your business is completely dependent on how much stress you can handle. Your income, how much money you produce and earn, depends 100% on how much stress you can handle. So my suggestion is get strong so you can take the hits that come along the way and succeed anyways. Become the kind of person that when that stress comes your way, you actually invite it and you embrace it so that you can succeed and grow and excel in life, not shrink and downsize and get small. You need to be big, think big, and embrace that stress.
That is absolutely brilliant. That's one of the interesting conundrums around stress is people think when I get there, I won't have any stress. And they get there, and of course there's more stress because there's just more business, more people, more family, more. And
Absolutely.
and what creates even more stress on top of that is the fact that we didn't expect it to be there. So I love your message to not just expect it, but embrace it and prepare for it, and then be strong and be ready and allow it and accept it and embrace it. That's just brilliant. So we are coming to the end of our time, but I would love you to just tie this all together with something to leave with our listeners. What can we leave with them to think about for this week following our session today?
Absolutely. I have two very brief things. Number one, you heard my story about how my dad was suffering and a chiropractor helped him. The question I always ask, and I want your audience to think about this, is when my dad was sick, when he was suffering, when he was hurting, was he the only one who suffered? Or does the whole family suffer? Do your children suffer? Do your parents suffer? And my message to you is that realize that it's bigger than you. That when you neglect your health and you don't prepare for that inevitable event that's going to come your way, you're not just hurting yourself. That so many other people will suffer because of that. That if we take the time and invest our time, energy, and resources into improving our own health, we're actually benefiting our children and our relatives and our spouse and all the people who love and care about us. And hopefully we're setting the example, because the second thing I want to talk about is I truly believe, and this is the title of the last chapter, is I believe we need a new revolution. See, I lived through the revolution in Iran. I remember when I was in the back of the car, I was 5 years old, and this protest turned into a riot, and there was things flying and tear gas being thrown, and my parents had told me to hide under the on the bottom of the car, so I wouldn't see this, but I could feel the car shaking, and being a kid, I had to look, so I lifted my head up, and what I saw was this man stumbling towards our car, and he had a white button-up shirt on with gray pants, leather shoes, and his hands were in the air as if he's praying and screaming at the sky. And as he got closer, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was actually a giant, like a butcher knife, stuck in his stomach, and he was bleeding, and he started to fall. And I put my head back down. I'll never forget that image. But that's what a revolution is. Now I'm not asking for that kind of a revolution. Not all revolutions are bloody. Not all revolutions are like that. But a revolution, by definition, is something that changes everything. You look at, historically, there's been so many revolutions in the world. In America, there was the Declaration of Independence and the Civil War. There was then the Great Depression and the Civil Rights Movement. And you're thinking all those were revolutions because they changed things. But let's go closer. You look at the 1980s, and I remember the invention of the incredible rice cake. What was the purpose of that rice cake for that people were promoting for your diet? Is they were saying it's fat free, and they were saying fat is so evil. We need to cut fat out. And what happened in the 80s? Obesity started to climb, heart disease and stroke increased, and it went through the roof. So maybe fat wasn't the problem. So then what happened in the 90s? 1991, they announced, sugar is the problem. And listen, I'm not promoting sugar. I think refined sugar should not be part of your diet. So that's the disclaimer. But look at what happened when foods went sugar-free. Those are foods made in factories. They're not natural foods. That's not the same as broccoli or kale. And so these sugar-free foods, what happened? You look at the 90s, the CDC says the cases of new diabetes tripled ever since everything went sugar-free. So that was a revolution, and that wasn't the problem. And today we're blaming stress. Everybody's saying stress is the problem. That's the reason we're all sick, we're all dying, we're all having all these problems. And I want you guys to revolt against that. That's not it. It's not the stress, because we can't handle the stress. It's because we need to be stronger. So and hopefully you'll get a chance to look through the whole book. But it's just 3 steps. It's very, very simple. Here's the revolution. Number 1, learn to trust your innate intelligence. Everyone has it. That's why we talked about genetics. That's why we talked about the nervous system. Your body knows what to do, but you got to know how and why. You should trust it. Number 2, regularly get checked by a chiropractor. Your nervous system needs to be functioning optimally. Chiropractic is the way. And then number 3, not only implement the Simple 7, but hold yourself accountable. Start maybe a small group of people who get together and work together, hold each other accountable. And you know what? Email me, contact me, revolution@thestressprooflife.com. Email me and tell me that you've started one of these groups, and I'll stay in touch with you. I'll put you in touch with other groups, and we're going to start a movement, and we'll change it so that we can pursue our dreams and succeed. I'm so grateful that I was able to talk to you today.
Oh, that is a wonderful message to leave with people. And let's just repeat, because I know everything's going to go fast and some people are driving in their car, but let's just repeat one more time how they can get in touch with you, your website.
Absolutely. It is, well, the email address is revolution@thestressprooflife.com. If you're interested in the book, it's on Amazon.com. So just search for StressProof, all one word, StressProof, and you'll be able to see the book there. And my website is midatlanticclinic.com, all one word.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Amir, for joining us today. It is so refreshing to hear someone explain some of these concepts in such user-friendly and clear and entertaining stories and examples. So it is really a wonderful opportunity for our listeners to get in touch with their own body and their own stress and maybe change a lot of how we think about things. So we appreciate having you with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thanks everyone for listening to Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. If you would like to share the podcast with someone who may not be listening today, of course, we appreciate you spreading the word. Our weekly experts are available for free, and you can share this podcast through the iTunes, also on our website, centerforepigeneticexpression.com or beyondyourwildestgenes.com, or just search Beyond Your Wildest Genes. We'll pop right up there, and there's lots of internet players that have picked up the podcast and are sharing that with others as well. So thanks you all for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.